Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special 12th night edition of our Lunch and Learn series here at the Charlotte Museum of History. Happy 12th night, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited to have you here today. We're excited to bring some of the merriment and festivity to your computer this afternoon. We love getting to welcome you here to the museum in person every year for 12th night, and since we couldn't do that this year, we just could not let 12th night go without having a little bit of fun. So thank you for joining us. We're so delighted you're here. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping things. Basically, just to give you an idea about kind of what's happening here today. We have a couple of tips for success. So just so everyone knows, participants will not be able to turn on their personal microphones or webcams. This does not affect your ability to hear or see the presenters. We want to hear from you though. So if you want to ask a question, if you want to know more about something, please use the chat or the Q&A in the Zoom room with us, or comment on our Facebook feed if you are joining us via Facebook today. To ask questions of our speakers, we hope that you'll type those into the Q&A. It'll be easier for us to recognize those later in the program. Use the chat in order to talk amongst each other, share information, or if you are having any sort of technical difficulties, education specialists will be happy to try to help you sort that out. I will say we are not necessarily tech experts, so please bear with us as we try to sort out any problems that you might be having. So welcome here. We're so excited to have you joining us today. And to start out, I do have to introduce some of our special guests today who we are extremely excited to have joining us. First off is Janet Wade. After practicing law and teaching in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, Janet retired and found her way to the Charlotte Museum of History. Always passionate about the colonial and Federalist eras of the United States history and her teaching, at the museum she developed a keen interest in the cooking, foodways, and medicinal herbs of the 18th century. Janet loves to conduct research, but even more, she loves putting her research into practice, making and wearing period-appropriate clothes, and cooking everything from forced pumpkin to akara. So welcome, Janet. We're delighted to have you here today. Our other special guest is Zach, the historian Lemhouse. So Zach Lemhouse holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in history and a Master's of Arts degree in history education from Winthrop University. For 5 years, he worked as an award-winning teacher in South Carolina's public schools. And Zach is currently employed as the staff historian for the Cultural and Heritage Museums of York County. So we are delighted to have both of you joining us here virtually because we always get to see you guys in person at our 12th night celebrations. So welcome and thank you so much for being here today. All right.
Awesome. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Angel. I work with Lauren. She and I are the education staff here at the museum. And we will help you guys in any way we can if you have questions or if you're having trouble. I am super excited to talk about 12th Night. 12th Night is one of my favorite sort of museum functions throughout the years. And, you know, at a lot of different historic house museums, people decorate for the holidays and have Christmas programs, and they'll have, you know, like an old-timey Santa, you know, come to the museum. And we don't do that. And, you know, it's not because like we're, you know, the Grinch or something like that. We do that because it's not historically accurate for our site. In the 18th century and even before the 18th century, Christmas is, and, you know, the holiday season is not really the big deal that it is today. Christmas was primarily a religious holiday. I talk all the time. My favorite thing that tells you just how much Christmas doesn't matter is George Washington's diary on Christmas Day, where he says, went to church, came home, worked on the farm, you know, whatever, and just worked. I mean, it was just a regular day that they went to church and that was it. And so, you know, where does this, you know, the festive merriment, you know, gift giving tradition come from? Well, a lot of times the British folks, Scottish folks, you know, people from the British Isles who came to the colonies are celebrating Twelfth Night instead, which is the night of the Epiphany, which I know Lauren is going to talk more about. And that was the time that sort of combines what we would consider Christmas and New Year's Eve, the beginning of the new year, into one day. And so that's what we do. You saw some pictures from some past 12th night programs just there. And we have a big party, we have bonfires, Zach comes and plays music for us. And we just have a grand time. Last year, we got to do an awesome Scotch tasting event with Janet. And so this is our attempt to bring the party atmosphere to your computer.
Exactly. And Twelfth Night does have this incredible long tradition. And as Angel said, there's a reason that we celebrate it at the museum. And that's because it's such an important part about life here in 1774. This is the holiday that the Alexanders and their family would have recognized and would have celebrated. And it does have its roots back centuries earlier, actually, with Samhain and Saturnalia. So we've talked a little bit about Samhain before. We actually had a nice discussion about it around Halloween. But that is a holiday that has these ancient traditions and the kind of thinning of the veil and the beginnings of this winter season. And then Saturnalia is actually going to have its roots in the pagan holidays of the Roman Empire. And it's this day of role reversal. It's this idea that the servant becomes the master. And we see the beginnings of this in Twelfth Night with our Twelfth Night King and Queen. And so what we really have with this Twelfth Night celebration is something that combines so many different ideas, so many different cultural traditions into one. And the Alexanders are, of course, celebrating this holiday here in the Carolina backcountry, but this is something that stretches across the British Empire. We see people in Scotland, in Britain, in Ireland, all over that are celebrating this in what we can call kind of the old world. And then it comes over here to these new places, new areas of the British Empire in the 18th century. And it's going to be celebrated very differently depending on your own personal religious beliefs. So Twelfth Night is also known in many cases as Epiphany. That's a liturgical day when the three wise men would have arrived. You also hear things like Dia de los Reyes that's celebrated today, and that is the same kind of concept here. If you're Anglican, you get to celebrate. You get to have a big party all year, all during the Christmas season. If you are Presbyterian, you are going to get in a lot of trouble if you are spending the majority of the holiday season, let's just say, rather intoxicated. So they are definitely going to look to this 12th night celebration as a chance to kind of blow off that holiday steam. And they're going to bring in some greenery into their houses. It's going to have a pleasant, as they say, Christmas scent. It's going to be things like rosemary, though, things like lavender. You're going to bring in holly, other evergreens to kind of celebrate that beginning of this new season and to remind you of the fact that the world continues, that there is this kind of space here. And so we thought we'd bring a little of that celebration to you here today. And there's a number of different ways that the Alexanders are going to celebrate. They're going to celebrate with music, which Zach is going to tell us a little bit about. They're going to celebrate with food, which Janet is going to tell us a little bit about. But they also have some interesting party ideas that they're going to do. So Angel, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we get to kind of set up this celebration here? Because we want you guys to be able to celebrate at home with us.
Sure. So there's lots of different games and revelries and, sort of fun activities that you can do with your family. Lauren talked about how it's about role reversal. And so if you ever are familiar with like the Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, that's what it's about, is role reversals. And so at a 12th night party, you have your king cake and you crown a king and queen. And, in the 18th century or something, this could have been someone who was lower class. And so it's sort of funny to switch roles for a day. And so you could also play card games, anything that is just general fun and merriment you can do. We played, I think, pickup sticks last year at our, we had like all sorts of little games, card games, a lot of games that are probably not appropriate for children because they involve alcohol. But, you can play even something kind of like slapjack. They didn't call it slapjack, but like card games like that are really fun to play with your family. And then, pick up sticks. And then, of course, you can crown your king and queen. And so the long-standing tradition is that you put a bean or a pea or some other kind of like little tchotchke inside your cake when you bake it. And the person who gets that tchotchke gets crowned the king or queen. And so we're going to crown a king or queen or monarch of our 12th night. If you are here in the Zoom room with us watching the program, you are already entered to become the king or queen. And if you're watching on Facebook, all you have to do is like the live stream that you're watching. So however you're watching, just hit the like button on Facebook. And if you're in the Zoom room, you're already here. And so what does the king and queen get? Because we can't give you a crown like we did last year. You're going to get a membership to the museum, which gets you year-round free admission. And while we're closed, it gets you a free virtual house tour. And that will be sent through your email. You get discounts on some future programs, and you get to support the museum and support this kind of programming that we're doing. So if you have any questions about that, please send us a note, comment on the Facebook stream, and Lauren will announce our king/queen/monarch at the end of the program. Awesome. All right. So are we ready to get started? Everybody nod your heads. Okay.
I think we're ready for Janet to start telling. We already had a question about cake. Someone is clearly after my own heart, wants to know about cake. So Janet, tell us what we get to eat on 12th night.
Well, 12th night was at its most about food and drink. It was something you would plan for and prepare for all year, because many of the recipes, many of the things that they had that night were expensive, they were difficult to come by, and because we're in the winter when things aren't growing or as available seasonally in the 18th century as they are today, you really had to plan and preserve the foods that you might want to use in the depths of January. And so because 12th night has some of its origins in ancient Celtic and Norse traditions, the meat was always the sort of centerpiece at the table. Now, in Norse tradition, it was a boar's head stuffed with mincemeat and wrapped in laurel wreaths. And the guest of highest social standing at the party got to carve up the boar's head, if you will. I don't have access to boar's head, and most people didn't. So we developed a couple other major traditions. One is the Christmas pie, and that was a meat pie put in a thick standing crust, unfortunately called a coffin. And the crust was not meant to be eaten. It merely held the meat, and it was the meat from lots of different animals. And it was layered light and dark, so that when you cut into it, the diner had sort of a visual treat as well as the meat to eat. But then what became really popular is the forerunner of what today we would call the turducken. You took deboned fowl of various sizes and stuffed one inside the other. And then the largest one on the outside was presented beautifully decorated to the center of the table. And I'll just mention for Outlander fans who might be joining us today, if you will remember the scene from season 1 where the Duke of Sandringham visits Castle Leoch and Miss Fitz presents this beautiful huge peacock, and he very ceremoniously takes the dagger and cuts into it. That's what we're looking at to start the food courses. But of course, no holiday tradition was complete without alcohol, and we had lots of options for that as well. One of the most common was a spiced wine. Today we would know it as a wassail. And wassail comes from the Norse words washail, meaning good health or good fortune. And it's really easy. All you do is take some spices like I have here, some cinnamon, some clove, nutmeg, allspice, that kind of thing. Put it into wine, warm it up, and you have a nice drink that's easy to serve to a crowd. Put it in a punch bowl, and that's easy for everyone to have a little taste of. Now, one of our favorite party drinks at the museum is called a Syllabub. And there are several different types of Syllabub, but they all include wine, can be red or white, but should be something a little on the sweeter side, cream, and lemon juice. And you can serve it one of 3 ways. You can just whip all that together and put it in a pretty glass and eat it with a spoon, and it's kind of like eating alcoholic whipped cream. You can pour the wine in the bottom of your glass and then put the whipped cream and lemon juice on top. Or our favorite way, because this is great for families, is to mix it all up together and then pour it into your pretty glass, and you let it sit for 2 or 3 days in the refrigerator, and you can begin to see how the wine and the whipping has separated. And that's a great thing for kids to watch, to be able to open the refrigerator and check on it every day to see how much separation you're getting. And you can make it with apple juice or non-alcoholic apple cider. So you can make a nice little treat for the kids as well. It's a nice, sweet, tart little palate cleanser or dessert at the end of the meal. And those were quite a treat. Now, one other very special drink that could be served at Twelfth Night was chocolate wine. Now, chocolate was very, very popular in the 17th and 18th century and has been in the colonies and America since the early 1600s. The cocoa beans were imported from South America, and then most of the chocolate production was done in New England. But if you planned ahead and saved your money, you could have ordered, perhaps from William Alexander, some chocolate to be brought back to you from Philadelphia, where it could be produced. And you would melt the chocolate into a port wine and then serve it in a really pretty glass. And I know it sounds a little odd, but it's really very tasty because you use a dark chocolate that gives you a little bit of bitterness with that nice thick port wine. And it really is just a lovely, lovely drink. And then, of course, no one can forget your whiskey. In the backcountry of the Carolinas, it was probably more akin to what we would think of as bourbon today because it's going to be corn-based rather than barley-based. But no celebration is complete without a wee dram.
All right,
but the highlight. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I have to ask because I know every single person in our audience is currently thinking this question. What was your favorite? Which one do you think is the best for celebrating the holiday season? I have to admit, I tried Syllabub this year and I really enjoyed it, although I need to work on cutting down recipes. Because I'm going to have Syllabub from now until 4th of July.
I like the taste of the chocolate wine, but I don't think I could drink a whole glass of it. I have to confess, personally, I'm a whiskey fan. But of course, the star of the celebration, as Lauren and Angel have already mentioned, is the 12th Night cake. Now, this cake is started weeks, if not months in advance. It is a lovely cake, and I have a piece here for everybody to see. It is just chock full of currants and candied lemon peel and orange peel and almonds. And all of those things were available, but they were very expensive, and you had to plan ahead to get those ingredients in. Once it's made, it's stored in a cool place, and every 3 days or so, you soak it in some brandy to keep it nice and moist so that when it is served, it's not that thick, sticky thing we think of as a fruit cake, but it still has a lightness to it and a freshness to it. Now, they're sometimes called rich cakes or great cakes, and there's a reason for that, because as Lauren mentioned with her Syllabub recipe, they were intended to be very large cakes, fit to serve an entire crowd, which is what made the finding of the bean so much fun, because the cake is so large. If you were lucky enough to get that piece with the bean to be the king or queen of 12th Night, you were really lucky indeed. Now, some people who were really energetic would take their 12th Night cake, and this is very heavy, and this is just a small one that I have done. But in addition to the bean being hidden in here, you would also have some other tokens that people could use. You might have a seed of some kind, so you could have a king and a queen. If you got a clove, you could have a villain for the evening. And if you put in a small piece of rag, you could have a tardy or a saucy girl. And so then you have all the characters you need to create a play or a farce for the evening, which, as Shakespeare pointed out, was very, very popular as a form of entertainment. So by the end of the evening, between the entertainment and the food and the drink, you have had a wonderful holiday.
I'm going to say that sounds like a wonderful holiday and sounds like a lot of kind of fun and exciting things that are happening. Of course, we know that a lot of Twelfth Night is, shall we say, not necessarily quite as family friendly as other parts of it, but it's great that we get to have some activities for kids as well, and the kind of especially with the Syllabub and changing it to apple juice in order to make it possible for kids to really kind of watch that reaction and see a little bit, we refer to it as colonial science experiments here. Janet, I have, I think, one more question for you in here that I've been asked, and feel free, anyone else, to chime in as well. I think it's a great sort of segue into our next sort of conversations. We were asked about kind of the fact that this Twelfth Night cake is really similar to the king cake that we see with Mardi Gras. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, Epiphany is the kind of beginning of the Carnivale season. And you see, again, a lot of these holidays in the 17th, 18th, even into the 19th centuries are really tied to the Christian liturgical calendar. So can you elaborate a little bit on that kind of connection between this cake and the Mardi Gras cake?
Well, and it is interesting because you see the same sort of traditions show up in lots of different cultures, and they're played out. And one thing that I would say, a tradition that we would never associate with this type of cake is a wedding cake. And they were frequently used at weddings. In fact, Martha Washington was the queen of the Twelfth Night cake. And she baked one every year, and in part for Twelfth Night, and in part because it was her wedding anniversary. And she and George would use that to celebrate. So I think what you see are these traditions finding their way with amazing similarity just into a lot of different cultures. Now, the 12th Night cake does not have some of the same religious significance, I guess you would say, as maybe the Mardi Gras cake, where you actually can find not just a token, but perhaps a small image of religious figures as well. This is sort of ending the holiday season, or what was called the daft days, when things were a little crazy. And so we're looking more to a secular point with the 12th Night cake than we are to a religious significance, but definitely still a party and a lot of fun, just like Carnival or Mardi Gras. Mm-hmm.
And we see these 12th Night ideas, just like 12th Night itself is based on these old pagan holidays. We see the kind of pieces of 12th Night and all of these sorts of celebrations kind of finding their way in other places. One thing that comes to mind for me is John Canoe, which is a celebration that comes originally from West Africa, is reinterpreted in the Caribbean, and then is actually brought to North Carolina. And it's a chance for enslaved people to kind of have that role reversal and celebrate this season here. And I know Tryon Palace out in Eastern North Carolina has an incredible celebration that they do every year. So I highly recommend you check that out as well. But we see a lot of these kind of traditions moving, changing, being reevaluated. And I think that actually gives us a great segue into the next topic that we're going to talk about, which is music, which anyone who knows me knows that is very near and dear to my heart as well, almost as near and dear as food. But we see a lot of these kind of things developing and moving throughout, again, this British Empire with music. So Zach, can you tell us a little bit about what it sounded like at 12th Night? We know what it tasted like. What did it sound like?
Sure, of course. So of course, music is an integral part in any 18th century celebration, not just 12th Night, but any celebration that would have occurred in the 18th century, music and dancing. And the most common instrument to be played, especially in the Carolina backcountry, would have been the fiddle. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you would have heard at Twelfth Night. But before I do that, I always like to answer the most asked question that I always get, which is what's the difference between a violin and a fiddle? Because I say fiddle quite a bit. So the short answer to that question is there's not a difference. The violin and the fiddle are the same thing. The slightly longer answer, you have to go back and look at the Latin root word of violin. So the Latin root word of violin is vitula or vitulare, which means to sing and rejoice. And I think that's very apropos because when I play, I feel like singing and rejoicing, and I hope when people hear me play, they feel like singing and rejoicing. But anyway, that's the Latin root word, vitula or vitulare, to sing and rejoice. And if you take that Latin root word and you translate it into a romantic language like Italian, you get the word violino or violin. If you take the exact same Latin root word, vitula, and you translate it into a Germanic language like German, you get fiddle. So it's not only the same instrument, it's actually the same word. It's just how it's been translated. So there's truly no difference. And another thing I like to point out is that today there is a concept, it's a very modern concept, that I am a violin player and you are a fiddle player, and never the twain shall we meet, right? It's like two ends of a spectrum. But in the 18th century, that was not the case. In fact, it was kind of expected, if you were a violinist and you were performing, it was kind of expected that you also perform some of these traditional fiddle tunes. I'll give you an example. The famous Italian violin virtuoso Niccolo Paganini, he toured Scotland in 1831, and he was actually criticized, specifically when he played in Aberdeen, he was criticized for not including traditional Scottish fiddle tunes in his set, in his repertoire. So when he came back 2 years later, he actually did start to include a couple more traditional Scottish tunes. So it was kind of expected that you would play, if you were a violinist, you would play classical pieces as well as some of these more traditional tunes. Now, the reason that we see the fiddle or the violin in the 18th century backcountry of the Carolinas is because of kind of the origin of the people that lived here during that time. Keep in mind that during the 18th century, a lot of the early colonists, immigrants to the backcountry of the Carolinas came from either the lowlands of Scotland or from the lowlands of Scotland first to Northern Ireland, a place called the Ulster Plantation. And then there the cultures kind of mixed, and that's where we get the term Scots-Irish or Scotch-Irish. And then these Ulster Scots, they would travel to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, typically the big port city there, and then travel south down the Great Wagon Road into the Carolina backcountry. And it is with the Scottish people that the violin becomes incredibly important, especially around 1746. Because in 1746, the King of England, King George II at the time, he passes something called the Acts of Prescription. And what this does is it makes illegal a lot of very quintessentially Scottish things, like the bagpipes, for example. And the reason the king did this was because it was essentially destroying the Scottish culture. And if you're going to take over someone's culture, if you're going to reign over them and they're going to be your subjects, sometimes it's a lot easier to do this if you can destroy the culture of the people that you're trying to hold power over. So that's kind of why the king was doing this. And in order to get around this, the Scottish people, in defiance, started playing their bagpipe marches, their songs that they would play on the bagpipes. They played them on the fiddle, which was perfectly legal. So this was in part as an act of defiance. And a lot of the techniques we hear even today with classical music and bluegrass music and any other kind of fiddle music or violin music, a lot of that technique goes back to playing these pipe tunes on the fiddle. In particular, the technique of playing two strings at the same time. This is called a double stop. And what you're doing is you're actually creating a drone. You're making a drone sound just like you would on a bagpipe on your fiddle. So if you'd like, I can actually play a little video of one of my favorite pipe tunes to kind of demonstrate how that kind of sounds. This is one of my favorites. This is a Scottish pipe tune called Highland Lady. Let's see if I can get this up for you guys.
Awesome. I was going to ask, can you show us a little bit about this and kind of see what this sounds like? I'm excited to see if we can hear the bagpipes.
Sure. So yeah, here it goes. So that's kind of the idea. I hope you could hear that okay. But that's the idea, that taking the bagpipe tunes and emulating them on the fiddle, because this was still legal. And then, of course, when, oh, thank you so much. Someone said beautiful. I appreciate that. When the Scottish people immigrated, either directly from the lowlands of Scotland to the Americas or to Ulster and then to the Americas, they brought with them their culture, of course. And not only is that their holidays and religious traditions, it's also their musical tradition. So they brought the fiddle with them, and that's why the fiddle was so common in the 18th century in the Carolina backcountry. Now, of course, the purpose of playing music like this was not just for the musical aspect, it was also for dancing. It was accompaniment for dancing. That was the entertainment of the day, in addition to the games that you would have. Dancing was, I would argue, probably the premier form of entertainment during the 18th century. So typically you would have, and I'm going to show you a very interesting little instrument. I love getting to talk about it because people typically don't get to see these anymore, but it's called a dance master's kit, or a pochette is the technical term for it. But of course, in English, we shortened it to just pocket. Pochette means pocket. And we just shortened it to kit instead of pocket. But what the dance masters or mistresses would do, and keep in mind, there were dance masters and mistresses everywhere in the 18th century. In fact, it was the English evangelist George Whitefield, when he was traveling through North Carolina in 1737, he observed disapprovingly that there was, quote, a dance master in every little town, end quote. So it was very common to have these dance masters or mistresses teaching these dances. And you wouldn't want, as a dance master, have to pay a violinist, because unlike today, back then musicians could make a living doing what they're doing. I could never make a living today. I'm not nearly good enough to make a living playing the violin, but back then they could. And a dance master or mistress wouldn't want to pay a professional musician to accompany dance practice. So the dance master or mistress would learn to play a little themselves, but they had to be able to dance and play at the same time. So a lot of times what they would do is they would play a very small instrument called a pochette. Like I said, it means pocket when you translate it into English, or later on we just call it the kit or the dance master's kit. And I will let you hear it in a minute, but don't get too excited because it is so small, it doesn't sound like much. And again, this wasn't for performance, it was for dance practice or composition. And a lot of people had these in the 18th century. It was called a pocket fiddle because it literally fit in the pocket of your greatcoat. Thomas Jefferson had 2 of them. They were very popular in Scotland. I know that after, it was probably the Battle of Prestonpans in Scotland, when Johnny Cope, one of the leaders in the battle, he actually retreated and left his coat and his belongings on the battlefield. They actually found his pochette on the battlefield. So it was very common to carry these around. In the 18th century. Yes, it's spelled pochette, P-O-C-H-E-T-T-E, pochette. You can look them up. You can buy them on eBay all day long, believe it or not. That's where I got this one. They're like $200, $300. So if you're interested, you can go on eBay. They're great little instruments, but you can't play it under your chin, of course. So you actually play it, and you'll see it in the video, but you actually play it under your arm like this. So I'll give you a little snippet of the pochette. I'll be playing a reel, which was a very common kind of dance. To dance to, you would dance a reel. So let's see if I can pull this video up for you. Give me just a second.
We had dancing to reels at our last 12th night, and I believe you actually played the pochette for us. There, you're right. It is definitely a quieter sound.
All right, yeah. Let's see if I can get this up for you guys. Give me just a second. Or you may have to get close to your speakers. It's kind of hard to hear. Turn up your volume. So that gives you a general idea of what the pochette sounds like. It does kind of sound like listening to an old-timey radio. It really does. It's and now that instrument, the pochette, I have it strung in gut strings. That was typically what instruments were strung in the 18th century. We don't get steel strings like you have today until the late 19th, early 20th century, to tell you the truth, is when steel strings really start to become popular. There's a misconception that gut strings were made out of cat gut. That's what you hear a lot, but this is untrue. Typically made out of sheep gut, to tell you the truth. There's a couple theories as to why we think, or why people say it was cat gut. One of the theories that some historians have put forward is that cat guts were, or gut strings, sheep gut strings, were made in the region of Spain called Catalonia, and then it kind of got shortened to like Catalonian gut, cat gut, and there's some other theories, but if you've ever heard cat gut strings on a violin, that is unfortunately untrue, or fortunately untrue. I love cats, but they would have been sheep gut strings, and that's what I was playing with the pochette. And that's pretty much it for me. Unless there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I say we definitely would love to hear from people, any of their kind of questions that they have about any of these 12th night traditions, especially because what we see with 12th night is it really is this celebration. And I think I probably speak for everyone here when I say we could all use a celebration right now. And to talk about these foods and talk about this tradition and this culture that endures, especially with the food, with the music, all of these different pieces here. So we would love to hear from you if anyone has any questions, anything that they want to know more about. Zach, while we wait for people to ask us some questions, I actually have a question myself that I would love to hear. When it comes to kind of the music that we hear in the 18th century, is there a standard repertoire that people are playing? Is it something that musicians are creating themselves? What do we see? Is it going to sound the same everywhere?
That's a great question. Yes, you have a lot of composers. You have a lot of very famous composers that would be creating music in the 18th century. I mean, and again, a lot of Scottish composers, because that is at least in the back country of South Carolina, because that is where a lot of the early immigrants are coming from. People like Neil Gow is probably one of my favorite composers. Does beautiful, beautiful 18th century Scottish fiddle pieces. And you do see it morph and change over time. For example, a lot of the most popular fiddle tunes, like Soldier's Joy is one, for example. It is considered to be a Scottish tune, old-time tune, American tune, a bluegrass tune, and you have these slight differentiations. For example, the one I played on the pochette, it's called Miss McLeod a Rassie, or Miss McLeod's Reel, but in the old-time tradition, they actually switch the A part and the B part. Let me explain. So fiddle tunes typically have an A part and a B part. You play the A part through once and then you repeat it, and then you play the B part through once and repeat it. So you play each part twice. I only played the A part today to save on some time, but the tune I played, Miss McLeod, in old-time tradition, they've actually switched the A part and the B part. So as a Scottish fiddle player, I have sat in on old-time jam sessions where I've been jamming around with old-time players, and we've gotten a little confused because they're starting in the B part, what I consider the B part, and I'm starting in the B part, what they consider the B part, so it can get very confusing. But you're right, these tunes, they do morph and they do change. For the most part, the melody stays very similar, but you will hear differences in the melody as well. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. It tells us a little bit about what it would have sounded like here. This idea that you have innovation, that you have change, but you also have these things that people would recognize. And we see that, of course, with the food as well. As Janet pointed out, there are these pieces that you would recognize. If you went to different celebrations all over the British Empire, you would see something that spoke to you, something that was a tradition and you could look at and say, oh, I know what that is. Today, obviously, we look at it and we go, what is that? But we're seeing a lot of the revival of some of these traditions as well, which is great. We had a question about the dance steps for the reels, though. Kind of similar to what I asked about the music. Were there standard dance steps, and how did people learn them?
So a reel is a dance step. So the term reel, that is a step that you do in traditional dancing. And it's essentially when people make figure eights around each other. And it's very beautiful if you've ever seen it done. So if you were dancing a reel, you are going to expect to have that figure appear in that dance somewhere. Now, people created dances just like they created music. There are certain steps that you have to work from, like a toolbox, so to speak, and then people can pull these different little aspects, these different little dance moves, and string them together to make very unique dances. But you will see, for example, that reel, the figure eight motion, in a reel. There's a quintessentially Scottish kind of dance called a strathspey, and strath being the bank of a river, and spey being the river itself. So strathspey. And the strathspey is a very, like I said, quintessentially Scottish dance. And when you're dancing in a strathspey, the strathspey step is kind of a little hop on one of your feet. You do a little hop, step, step, hop, step, step. So anytime you're dancing a strathspey, you're going to see that dance move in there somewhere. I hope that answers your question.
So we have kind of a standard set of dance moves that'll move about, and dance masters are going to call this out and the like. I have another question here. It's a great question. Where was a celebration typically held? Was it held outside? Is it held in the home? Is it everyone in the community kind of celebrating together? Or is it families inviting people? How do people get together and celebrate?
That there was a real difference with that, and it changed dramatically over time. And of course, the excellence, you could say, I guess, of your celebration depended in large part on your socioeconomic status. So if you were a wealthier person and you had a large home, a good bit of this would take place inside the house because it is cold. And you might have extended family come like we do now for the holidays, or you might have invited neighbors from nearby farms, and they would all gather at one location. And usually it meant that they stayed over because it would be such a distance to travel back late at night that you would end up with a house full of people into the next morning. Your celebration might be much more modest if you were of much more modest means. But over time, by the time we get to the Victorian era, the celebration of Twelfth Night really starts to fade because Christmas becomes celebrated more on the day, smaller family gatherings, less of the austere Christmas Day celebration, and more raucous Twelfth Night celebration. So over time, we do see how that evolves. And it's so interesting. It wasn't until the early 1950s that Christmas was actually recognized as a holiday in Scotland. That before that, it wasn't even a recognized day. It was a regular go to church, go about your work day, as Angel pointed out with Washington's diary. But all of that we see begin to change in the Victorian era.
So like everything else, it evolves over time, and it's going to depend. That's everyone's favorite answer when someone says, well, it depends. But in so many cases, I mean, you're talking about this massive collection of people from all over the world that are celebrating this holiday. So it really does depend on where you are, who you are, and what that kind of celebration is going to look like.
And especially where food is concerned, we have to be very cognizant of what was available. And the recipe for a great cake or a rich cake in Scotland may not be able to be reproduced in the colonies because those items may not be available to us, though there was an enormous trade system and things that we couldn't even imagine would be available were, but at a cost that might have made them prohibitive. So perhaps you couldn't afford currants, but you had a cherry tree, so you would use the dried cherries from your cherry tree instead of Spanish currants for your 12th night cake.
Absolutely. Let's see here. I think we don't have any more questions. Please send them to us if you have any more. We are always happy to answer it. As you could probably tell, we all very much enjoy talking about history, and particularly talking about happy history here and these celebrations and the kind of beginning of the new. So I think since I see Angel here, we're ready to take a look at our 12th night king and queen or monarch. Am I right?
Yes, we're ready to pull those folks. So a reminder that if you're in the Zoom room, you are already entered. And if you're watching on Facebook and you want to like our Facebook stream in like the next 10 seconds, we can add you to that list too, but you're going to get a membership to the museum that helps support our programming and our mission to bring history to you, and also gets you some goodies like free admission and program discounts and stuff like that. So Lauren, go ahead and poll our winners.
All right, so in the 18th century and in years past, this would have been put into the 12th night cake. And if you found the pea or the coin or the little crown, any of those kind of things, you would automatically be crowned the monarch of 12th night. Since we couldn't figure out a good way to do that for this program here, sorry guys, we're gonna have to use a random number generator here. Got to have some 21st century solutions here today. So I am gonna go ahead and do that random number generating, and it looks like our monarch is going to be William Summers. So I believe I have an email address associated with that. I also believe that you are actually in our chat here today. So feel free to send us a message and we'll make sure that we get you the information for your membership. So congratulations. Thank you for joining us and for being a part of supporting the museum's missions here. We're excited to welcome you to our member family.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Congrats, William. Like Lauren said, we do have an email for you, but if you don't hear from us, just get in touch and we'll be glad to give you that membership. Thank you all so much for coming and joining us for this program. I'm going to attempt to pull up some beautiful photos from past 12 nights while we wrap it up here. And then we can say goodbye. It is the middle of the week, but I hope that you guys are all enjoying your the end of the holiday season. Thank you so much for joining the museum. Thank you to our supporters, people who have become members, people who have donated to us in this last year. We know that it's been a really tough year and we appreciate you supporting us through this. And so we'll hope to see you again. If you want to become a member, you can do that on our website. If you want to donate, you can do that on our website. We also have a great February coming up. We're going to do a lot of different programming about Black history here in Charlotte. And we're going to focus on the historic Siloam School. So on February 4th, we're doing a lunch and learn about ring shout dancing with one of the professors from UNC Charlotte. And then on February 18th, we are launching Inside Siloam School, which will take you inside virtually the historic Siloam School and get to see the inside of this almost 100-year-old building that not a lot of people have been in the last 10 years, and talk about the history of education and segregation here in Charlotte. I hope you all have a great day and the rest of your week, and Happy New Year.
And thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you to Janet and Zach for being a part of this program. We had such a great time talking with you both today.
Thank you, my
so much.
pleasure.